lately I've been thinking about whether free software is a cope. And in this video I want to share my thoughts with you. And I've written an article on my webpage about this already, but I think speaking about something is very different than writing about something, so I thought I'd make a video about it anyways. Alright, and this is gonna mostly follow the like structure of the text I've written. But yeah, again, when you speak about something, I think a lot more like broader information comes out. Okay, whatever. Back to the topic. So, is free software a cope? Because, I mean, if you think about software in general, software doesn't exist without like context. There's just not like a thing, like software is not a thing you can hold in your hands. I mean, it needs something to run on. It needs a computer to run on. And if you like have to deal with a lot of software, it kind of, in your mind, it takes on like a character of its own, where it's not really the like thing that's running on the metal, but more like the source code or the high level language you're writing within. Your program in. And so abstraction is like a key point here, because when we deal with software, it's like highly abstracted. Like all these high level languages. I mean, even C is like pretty high level if you think about it. But especially like something like Scheme. Like Scheme is like super high level. Like, so you don't really think about what you're actually trying to like accomplish on like the metal itself, so on the computer itself, but rather you're thinking like logical terms. Okay, so I have the string and I want to like split it at like every comma, and then I want to map some function over this like list or whatever. Okay, so that's mostly what we think about when we deal with software. Or also like not just in programming but in general, like, okay, I have this DWM and I want to add this patch, and let me download this text file and git apply and whatever. So abstraction is a key point here, but the lower you go in abstraction, the more complicated things get, of course. So again, something like Scheme, super high level, super easy. Something like C, well, still pretty high level, but a lot more complicated because you need to like manage memory by hand and stuff like that. And if you get to something like assembly, it's like, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, you can write an assembly, but you're not gonna get like quote unquote a lot done in like any modern or contemporary sense. So you're not gonna write your next like software as a service project in like assembly. Like, of course not, because that wouldn't make any sense. But getting a bit off track here. So abstraction is a key point, and the lower you go in abstraction when it comes to software, the harder it gets. And in a sense, the more control you have, because you can do more stuff. But in another sense, the less control you have, because you need to worry about a lot more stuff. If you don't need to worry about like memory management, you can do a lot more in a lot less time and with a lot less effort, because you're just higher when it comes to abstraction. And if we then get down to like the actual metal, so the actual like CPU your stuff is running on, we kind of like completely lose control, if we're being honest. Because, I mean, theoretically we know, I think, yeah, that's the next slide, hardware. So theoretically we know how a CPU is like built and structured and how it works. Okay, we have this XOR and we have all these like gates and whatnot and all the stuff. And yeah, theoretically, we know how to like add numbers and subtract them, and how like a string is stored. Okay, it's like bytes and whatever, blah blah. But like that's still like thinking in like a software kind of mindset. Because when it comes to hardware, like, I mean, what is an like what is a byte or rather a bit? Like, how is that actually stored? Okay, so we have like these like transistors, and they're like built out of silicon, and they like, you kind of like with like voltage you can like change the where the like it kind of gets really fuzzy and really complicated suddenly. And again, we can theoretically like read about that in like on like Wikipedia or learn about it in like a school or university or whatever. But like this is all super abstract in a sense, because like real hardware is like super complicated. Like I mean, I don't have to tell you, I think, but it's like super complicated. And again, you kind of lose control because of the like complexity of the whole thing. And I mean, that's pretty obvious if you think about it, because you can't create hardware. Like it's impossible, pretty much, like practically impossible for any of us to like create our own hardware. I mean, yeah, we can buy like some wires of AliExpress and like some I don't know, Arduino whatever, and like solder them together and whatnot, but we can't like actually like create a CPU or like some Arduino board. Like we can't create that by hand. It like it's not possible. You need big industry. All this stuff can't exist without big industry. And this is so obvious that we don't think about it like at all, because we take all of this stuff for granted, kind of, but not like for granted in I don't know, like human sense. Like for granted in the sense of, well, it just exists. Like all this stuff is so normal today that we don't think about it like at all. But if we do consciously think about it, it's very clear that, well, what I'm recording this video on a on a laptop that's like infinitely complicated, and that like I don't know how many people worked on to even create, and like all the organization and planning that went into it, and all the testing and all the production and all the like giant machines which cost $1 quadrillion of like capital investment. And not just that, I mean the microphone itself that's recording my voice is the same thing. Like all this stuff is so complex, so immensely complex. You need, like, per definition, you need big industry. Without it, it's simply impossible. I mean, and again, this is super obvious, but I think it's important to like say this and think about it, because otherwise we're kind of, I don't know, tapping in the dark. And this brings me to my point, actually, which is, if the base of software, so if the hardware is so complicated and so complex and so impossible to create without like big industry, then you really have to like question the whole free software thing, don't you? Because in like free software, I don't want to say communities, but like in the free software space, like most people who are in free software don't really like big industry, or rather big tech. Like something like all these big tech companies, like, you know, Facebook or Meta, Microsoft, Apple, whatever. They're not really liked in the free software space because, well, or like Google, because I mean they do create free software to some extent. I mean Google does, of course. Google is like heavily invested in open source. I mean most of their stuff is, well, I mean, not most of, but a lot of stuff is open source from Google, like Chromium, Android, stuff like that. And Microsoft is starting to kind of get into the same kind of vibe, if you want to call it that, and even like Facebook. So they're all kind of moving to open source, and I'll talk about open source in a bit, and how it relates to free software. But these companies are still not liked because they are like, yeah, because they don't have the same spirit, I want to say, as like the spirit of free software. So it's not about individual people or like hackers who come together and create some cool practical software, and like it's not about like human control, but it's just about like pure technicality, if you want to say that. I hope you know what I mean. So big industry, big tech, not liked in free software, but again, they produce the base level on which all software runs. So yeah, so then you really have to ask, well, I mean, how can you ever hope to create something that has to do with like freedom and stuff like that if the base level is so corrupted? So there's no purity at all in computing. If you think it through to the end, I mean, again, free software is like this kind of purity idea, I think. But when it comes to like hardware, you can't have that. Like that's impossible. And then if you think this, like if you think more about this, I mean most hardware is proprietary. It's very rare to have like an open hardware project. And that is kind of like, I mean, it's kind of understandable, of course, like from a economic point of view and whatnot. But it's also like, as I said earlier, all of this hardware is so complex that it's like practically it doesn't matter if it's proprietary or not, because you can't produce it by yourself and you can't really fix it by yourself either. I mean, you can try, and sure, but like this is a kind of battle you always lose, I think. And I mean, this is all way before. Like I'm not talking about like right to repair or anything like that. I'm talking about like the pure technicality of, can you repair it or can you repair something? And when it comes to hardware, most of the cases the answer is no, because again, this stuff is just so complex. All right. Okay, now let me go back to this. Let me finish the point, and that is, you kind of have to come, or you kind of realize, if you think about this, that free software is, in a sense, a kind of cope, because we are trying to cope with the fact that we are dependent on machines we don't have control over. So what we try to do, of course, is make them controllable, like make them come under our control. I think that's what free software is mostly about, or to a great extent, at the very least. And when I say like free software is a cope, I don't mean this in a derogatory kind of way, because as this next slide says, coping has its justification. I mean, of course it does. So only because something is a cope doesn't mean it's like bad or something. Because if we think more about this, the situation we now find ourselves in with like computers and all this like high tech stuff, it's kind of a situation we don't have control over, like at all. Because I mean, if you want to exist in society, well, you have to like have money, and if you want to have money, well, you have to do stuff for other people, because that's kind of like how money works. And if you have to do stuff for other people, that in pretty much all cases nowadays involves using high technology. And in most cases, high technology means computers. So you can't really get around like using a computer nowadays. So of course, I mean, the maybe the only rational conclusion one can come to is to at least try to make the best out of it, and at least try to like regain control. And I think and let me also say this, I mean, if it isn't clear, I think with free software, there is a great possibility to regain control to some extent over computers. I mean, of course it is. Computers are only there to run software after all. But again, even when it comes to like something like privacy or something, or security, it's obvious how the base level of hardware can corrupt the whole software stack. With like, if you think of something like Intel ME or something like that, it's really obvious. And if you get like into like cybersecurity and all this stuff even more, like it's kind of crazy how much hacking you can also do with like hardware stuff. Because again, when you hit the hardware, you kind of forego all the software stuff. So the software can be as secure as it wants to be, but if you have access to like the hardware, you can do whatever, obviously. And this is all kind of obvious stuff, but I think it's important to talk about what's interesting to talk about, at least. Maybe not important. Well, depends on where you're coming from. So yeah, coping has its justification in the sense that you have to cope with the situation. I mean, you have to like find your way, and like you have to, there has to be a way you exist. Obviously there has to be. If you want to exist in society, that is, which most of the cases I think you should and you want to, obviously. Well, maybe not so obviously, but maybe that's a topic for another time. So, again, the situation we find ourselves in with like computers and stuff is not something we can change. So we have to like handle that in some kind of way. And so free software is a cope in that sense, but it's a good cope, and it has its justification. Let me think. Have I missed anything so far? Because, yeah, I also want to kind of talk about the kind of people who use free software and what it says about someone if they use free software. And yeah, open source I'll talk about more later, but I don't mean like open source people, because I think these are like very different camps. But again, I'll come to that in a second. So when I say kinds of people, I mean like what drives someone to like be invested in open source, because it is really a kind of niche. A kind of niche. Like free software is not like advertised in the mainstream or something. Obviously not. I mean, software itself is like very niche, kind of niche, but free software in particular. So what drives someone to get into that kind of stuff? And I think everyone has their own personal like reasons for that. But I think there are personal reasons always. Like for me, for example, one great like or one of the big things that got me into free software was like this whole privacy aspect with like the Snowden leaks and stuff and all this kind of stuff, like like the NSA spying on everyone and all this kind of stuff that's kind of common knowledge nowadays. I mean, even back then, I mean, the Snowden leaks were a big thing. So so that was one thing, but also like my frustrations with like Microsoft Windows and yeah, and kind of that stuff. But I think I think everyone who's in free software has kind of something like that, like some personal like grievance with some software or something which drove them to like look for an alternative, and an alternative which would let them regain control, I think. And I mean, if you look at the history of the FSF, so the Free Software Foundation, and at like the story of like Richard Stallman, it's the same thing. I mean, Stallman only thought about the concept of free software because if I remember this correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, because he was frustrated with a printer or with printer software which was proprietary and and which he didn't have control over. And because I mean, Stallman is of course out of the like academic field, and in academia back then at least, most software was free software, like kind of by default. I mean, people didn't even think about like free software as a concept because it was just normal to share your software. Because I mean, in a research field, that's kind of obvious, because if everyone shares their stuff, you get more done, you get more progress or whatnot. So, and this personal frustration with the printer software drove him to like even think about like free software as a concept that would give people freedom in computing when it comes to software, at least. So yeah, I think there is like everyone who's in free software kind of has their own personal like journey to it, and I think fundamentally it's kind of always has this theme of a loss of control. I mean, privacy is the same thing, because what's privacy not if not a lack of control over who gets to know your stuff, your information. And again, of course, like frustrations with Microsoft Windows or something like that are kind of the same thing. Yeah. So yeah, again, I think it says a lot like this whole thing says a lot about people who are in free software, and that is that they want to regain control in some sense or another. At least that's like a big part of it, I think. Let's get to open source. So open source is, and this is very closely related to open source if you think about it, because open source really does away with all the freedom stuff. Like personal control and that stuff is not really that important in like open source as a movement, quote unquote. And it's even it's in the name itself, open source. The source is open, and with like free software, you have like the freedom aspect in the name itself. Even though free software is a kind of terrible and confusing name, but it kind of hits the point. So maybe Libre software is kind of better term to use. So yeah, open source is. I think open source is, when it comes to the main point, it's about development efficiency. And of course, open source is the best when it comes to development efficiency. As I said just a second ago, in academia, if you share your stuff, you get more done. I mean, in development, it's the same thing. If you share your stuff, everyone gets more done. Everyone can contribute. You get like free development, free as in like free beer development for like companies. Free bug reports, free bug fixes, all this kind of stuff. So there's a very practical aspect of this whole thing. But again, I think it completely misses the point, and also the point of, well, the point of free software and the point of freedom, but also like the point of like the coping aspect of it. So open source is not really a cope, maybe a cope with bad software and with bad development. Well, but maybe you wouldn't speak of cope then, because that's something you can change. So yeah, let me think. Next slide. Oh yeah, normies and software. Yeah, this is the last one. If you think about like the mainstream and society as a whole, well, no, let me start off differently. Because like frustration with like software is like, let me go to this slide. Frustration with software is like a common thing, of course, but I mean, it's really like just one like tiny aspect of our society, because in general, like frustration with like technique and like techniques is like very common nowadays. I mean, in the article I wrote about this topic, I wrote about like a traffic jam. If you're stuck in a traffic jam, that's in some sense a technical situation, because I mean like traffic, like car traffic, is like technical. Obviously it is. I mean, there are technical rules. I mean, the car you're driving in is a technical thing. The road you're driving on is also technical. I mean, it's all technical. So, and if you're stuck in a traffic jam, you really have no control, really. At least in the context of society. I mean, of course, you could like just exit your car and do whatever you want, in most cases. But like in the context of like, well, this is my car, I don't want to lose it. I can't just, I mean, I don't want to be fined for like just leaving my car here and stuff like that. I mean, you really have no choice but to endure the traffic jam. So yeah, there's not a choice you have. And this is the case in most like technical situations in society, if you think about it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could list like this is like such a normal and common thing that we don't ever think about it, like ever, I think. So you don't really think about all these technical like rules and limitations and like this technical force which is behind everything, because it's just normal to us nowadays. Even something like if you want to buy something in a store and you don't have like enough cash, I mean, you're not gonna get the thing. Like there's no, well, I know this what's it called? This kind of employee that works at the store, and we know each other, and I trust him or her or whatever, and so I'm just gonna get back later and pay it later or whatever. That's not a thing nowadays, like, especially with like big companies and big chains and stuff like that. I mean, it doesn't work. That's theft. If you just take the stuff and leave. So this is also kind of this is a technical situation. And most situations nowadays are just like that. So yeah, I don't really know. Well, yeah. I hope you get what I mean. And again, with hardware, it's also the same thing. If something breaks, or if you want to fix stuff, like if something breaks on your computer and you think, well, I'm gonna fix it, I'm gonna like solder it back on. Well, you have to buy a solder iron and stuff like that. So you have to have the technical equipment to fix your technical equipment. You can't fix your computer by hand. Like, obviously not. And again, all of this stuff is so obvious and so normal for us that it's kind of hard to like talk about without like sounding like I don't know. But what I want to say, especially with the slide, normies and software, is that this kind of state of mind where you kind of don't have control of over anything because everything is so technical, kind of leads in the mainstream and in society as a whole to the kind of conclusion, well, software is the same thing, because software is of course technical, and well, I mean, if something doesn't work in like a software context, well, we like, what can we do? Whatever. Like we don't have control anyways. Like this kind of mindset, and I think that's very, yeah, that's like super ingrained in society. So I mean, if you have like some software problem, I mean, everyone kind of understands, and it's kind of like normal to just say, well, it's the software, well, whatever, well, computer doesn't work, whatever, and not like whatever in like a it doesn't matter kind of way, but more in like a like everyone has these kind of problems, and it's not like everyone is kind of doesn't have control over anything, even when it comes to software. So it's kind of normal to just be like useless. Well, useless when it comes to like understanding and controlling software. And this is really, I think, the kind of part where where free software again comes into play, because when it comes to software, one does have control, obviously. I mean, again, free software is all about that. And software is so easy to like create and control that it's really, that it's not even that big of a thing. But for normies, of course, it is, because they are not, they don't get it, they don't understand. And when it comes to like proprietary software, like, I don't know, Windows or Mac or whatever, I mean, of course, you don't really have control. These companies have control, but you as the end user don't. And that's the point of free software, of course. And again, when it comes to open source, I want to also say, I mean, open source is kind of, from the mindset, it's different, but also like in a practical sense. Because let's take something like Chrome and Chromium. Because Chromium is open source, but is it like free software? Is it like the user has control, kinda? I mean, in the case of Chromium, because everyone uses, like half the world uses Chrome, I mean, of course you're gonna have like free software forks which respect your privacy. Like, for example, Google Chromium, which I use. But with like, and with Android, it's the same thing, because these projects are like so huge that a lot of people kind of find together to create like privacy respecting or freedom respecting like forks or whatever. But in general, I think open source kind of, and well, free software, I mean, all this stuff, like, it's about complexity, what I want to say. Because the more complex a piece of software gets, the less freedom respecting it gets, obviously, because you need to have like more knowledge and more like technical expertise to control it, obviously. So if I want to change something in like Chromium, like, where am I gonna start? Like Chromium is, or Android, like I have to like first, like, I don't know, study the whole thing for like I don't know how long to even get an understanding of how it works and all this kind of stuff. So I mean, yeah, the source is open, like it's open source, or it's even free software, but like in a practical sense it kind of isn't. And I think the mentality of open source more easily leads to something like this, to like super complex software which is like impossible to like understand or change. Well, not impossible, but like super hard to understand and change. Whereas free software, I think, leads more to like to like software which is easy to understand and change. Well, at least in my mind, that's how things are like located. All right, but again, back to normies. So again, the point I want to get here is normies think because everything that's technical in the real world, or most of the technical things in the real world, they don't have control over, that software is the same thing. And like ultimately it is the same thing, because you don't have control over the like base level which software runs on. But like in a practical sense, it obviously isn't. All right, yeah. So I mean, all of this is to say, and I think in the article I write this like somewhere in the middle. I don't know why. I mean, I don't want to say that we shouldn't all, like, no one should use computers. I mean, if we think things through to their like extreme end, I mean, yeah, like computers should not be a thing in like a good world, because again, you need like giant industry to like create them. And I mean, that in itself isn't bad, but well, the things that are necessary for big industry are ultimately bad. But in a like, but do you want to say we should throw away our computers right now and here? I mean, of course not. I mean, again, to exist in society, you kind of have to compute. And with free software, I think, and I also wrote this in the article, I think everyone should use as much free software as possible. Like, everyone should have as much control over their computing as possible, but everyone, should also be using as little software in general as possible, or only use as much software as necessary. So as much free software as possible, but only as much. Oh god, I can't speak. Only as much software as necessary, in a sense of like, you shouldn't be using a computer for stuff you don't really need a computer to like do. So I think this whole mindset of I'm just gonna digitize everything and gonna do everything on a computer and stuff like that, that's kind of like a wrong turn. But yeah. So this was a lot of talk. I mean, if you want a concise, like my thoughts in like a concise manner, just read the article on my website. But this was kind of more of my thoughts, maybe, hopefully. So I hope I hope you understand kind of my mindset and my viewpoint of these things. And it's a very kind of, well, it's not a very nice or like easy point of view, but I think it's very realistic when it comes to like thinking things through to the end, because again, when it comes to free software, we don't often talk about like the hardware, but it is like it is the base level, like literally, like software can't exist without hardware, and hardware when it comes to freedom is pretty bad. Yeah, and I mean there are also, and I think like when it comes to like software and hardware and how they like where they intersect, I think there's like, I think like something like LibreBrute is like a fantastic project. Of course it is, because it tries to get like full control of the software that is running on the hardware, not just like 99% of control. So it tries to eliminate something like Intel ME and stuff like that. So, and I mean, if you have the possibility of running like LibreBrute, or if you want to go that far, I mean, yeah, sure, you should, if you want to do that, of course. And I'm using a LibreBrute laptop right now, and I mean it's great. So I don't want to say that free software doesn't have like practical like ramifications and that it's like useless when I say it's a cope. I just want to say it's a cope in a sense that it is a cope. Because we are coping with the fact we live in a world where computers are like an obligatory thing you have to use, but computers are like black boxes over which you don't have real control in the sense that you can create them, you fully understand how they work, or you can theoretically fully understand how they work, you can fix them, like all the free software freedoms if we think about it. So study, share, change, redistribute, I mean all this stuff you can't do with hardware. Yeah, so free software is great, use it whenever you can. And I hope I hope this wasn't too confusing or like a sharing of my thoughts. But yeah, I think that's it. Have a nice day.